Meanwhile, Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee now are pushing for a public hearing on the Epstein files, urging their Republicans to call top Justice Department officials to testify about their handling of the investigation. Let's bring in the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland. Hey, Congressman, thank you so much for being with us. So this is fascinating, to say the least. You have 83% of Donald Trump supporters saying they want the Epstein files released. You have the president calling it a Democratic hoax. We've had Tom Winter on this week, Ken Delaney, who's going to be on in a few minutes, just had David Rohde on this morning, who said, well, the president's actually correct. From all of our reporting, there's no magic list out there. There's no Epstein list. And there's not a lot of things that can be released that would be damaging to this rich and powerful group of men. I'm curious, and there's a poll number, 83% want, among Trump voters, want it released. What is the Democratic response to this? What should the Democratic response to this be, given what the news reports are on what's in the files and what's not in the files, but also what Trump voters are demanding?
Well, it's not just Trump voters. I mean, the vast majority of the American public says release the files. And that's all we're saying. There's a huge file on this case. There are photographs in this case. There have been several law enforcement investigations that are completed. Jeffrey Epstein is dead. One of his other associates is dead. Maxwell's in prison for 20 years. So the criminal investigative process is essentially over unless there are new people who surface, in the prior investigations. But just release the files. That's all really the whole American public is saying. And, when the question is asked, well, where did people get the idea that there's a huge list of power elite actors who participated in the child sex ring that Epstein was running? They got it from Donald Trump. Donald Trump was the one promoting that idea, and J.D. Vance and Attorney General Bondi. So at this point, they've got to come clean with the public. That's not a difficult ask. And everybody is wondering, why suddenly has Donald Trump performed this 180-degree U-turn on the whole thing, and he wants to just sweep it under the rug and say there's nothing to see here. So he's causing a lot more problems for himself as he delays the inevitable release of the file. And by the way, we don't want a release of the information that Pam Bondi deems credible. We want the entire file. We don't, we don't trust Bondi to say what's credible and what's not. We can be the judge of that ourselves.
So a lot of questions here. This has been a bizarre story for 20 years. I mean, the original plea deal that Acosta did in the Southern District of Florida, letting the state set up a deal where he walks in and out of prison. He works out of his office in Palm Beach. You have that part of the story. You have part of the story where, and we talked about it in 17, 18, 19, we kept asking, why is this guy walking free? At the same time, Julie Brown was writing her extraordinary stories for the Miami Herald. But so many questions. But obviously, one question, you're saying release the files now. Why didn't the Biden administration, why didn't Merrick Garland release the files from 21 to 25? And if they didn't release the files then, why should they be released now?
So first, on your point about Acosta, you're absolutely right. This was Donald Trump's Secretary of Labor, who was then the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida. DOJ had prepared a 60-count federal indictment against Epstein for running this child sex ring with human trafficking charges and prostitution and conspiracy and so on. All of that got transposed into one count of solicitation at the state level. They covered the whole thing up, and they brokered that deal without the involvement of any of the victims or their families. So Democrats have been demanding hearings on that. We were demanding hearings on that and full disclosure on that many years ago. And we were blowing the whistle on Acosta, and he was forced to resign. So, this thing has had the stench of corruption for a long time. Why is it such a big deal now?
So did you
Donald
get
Trump
any evidence on that, Congressman? Let me ask you about Acosta. I know he had to resign. Did you get any evidence on why did you figure out why this sweetheart deal was given? Any evidence on sex tapes then, or client lists, or any of the other things that 20 years later we're all asking for? Because it seems to me that was the original sin, so to speak, that sweetheart deal. And I fear 19 years later, any evidence that was available then is probably destroyed by now. What did you learn from your investigation of Acosta and this original sweetheart deal in 2006?
Well, we never had a full-blown investigation, which is what, we were demanding. Acosta did end up resigning when all of these issues were raised. Obviously, there was all kinds of influence used in order to suppress a real prosecution and a thoroughgoing investigation, and they closed out the victims and their victims' families. So Epstein was able to use all of his powerful connections, including who was then his best friend, Donald Trump, in order to suppress a real hearing into what had happened. And look, why is this important? Because the sexual abuse of young people and children is a crisis throughout our society. There's, of course, the church scandal, or many church scandals. There's what happened at Michigan State. There's what happened at Ohio State.
But Congressman, you could have gotten that from 21 to 25 when Democrats controlled the DOJ. Why? It was a crisis then. It's a crisis now. Why didn't Democrats call for it from 21 to 25?
So, I mean, you'd have to go back and look specifically at particular prosecutorial decisions and what was taking place in terms of the other cases. So I don't know. We could try to reconstruct that record. But the point is that Donald Trump is the one who has led the crusade to say that that Epstein, who was his very close friend, and there's all kinds of pictures of them and so on, that Epstein was at the center of this broad conspiracy. He's now in a position to do exactly what he demanded, which was to release all of the files. And so why is that not happening? That's the question. I can't answer for Merrick Garland or any of, anybody else in the Department of Justice. But I will tell you that I believe there is a bipartisan consensus in the Judiciary Committee now that all of these records need to be released, and it's within their power to do it. That's what they were demanding. All they have to do is release the files, and not some of them, not the ones that Pam Bondi deems credible. They all should be released. And by the way, they're also talking about subpoenaing Maxwell to come testify. That's great. She obviously, though, is looking for a presidential pardon and clemency, so she should not be viewed as the oracle for everything that happened. We should take her testimony with a grain of salt, but it's fine if they want to bring her forward, and that can be part of it, but we want the files themselves.
All right, ranking member on the House Judiciary Committee, Congressman Jamie Raskin, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it.